He texted me at 6:43 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, watching the light come through the window the way it does in October. Thin and pale, like it's not sure it belongs there anymore. My phone was face up on the table. I'd been waiting on a message from my contractor about some work on the back porch, so when it buzzed, I picked it up without thinking. It wasn't my contractor. Plans changed. Corey wants his dad there for the holidays, not a stepdad. You'd be uncomfortable anyway. We'll talk when I get back. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the table and picked up my coffee. It was still warm. I need to back up because none of this makes sense without the 18 months that came before it. My wife. I'll call her my wife because that's what she was. Legally, right up until she wasn't, had a son from her first marriage. Corey, 22 years old, finishing up his last year at a school down in Georgia, studying something in business. Smart kid. Quiet. We'd had a decent relationship, or at least I thought we had. He called me by my first name, which was fine. We watched football together on Sundays when he was home. He ate my cooking without complaint, which, if you knew how I cooked, was its own kind of compliment. His biological father, I'll call him what Corey called him, which was Dad, capital D, had been out of the picture for most of Corey's teenage years. Left when the boy was 12, moved up north somewhere, sent birthday cards when he remembered, which wasn't often. My wife had raised Corey largely on her own before we got together, and I had stepped in and done what I thought a man in my position was supposed to do. I helped pay for the school. I co-signed the apartment lease near campus. I put Corey on my car insurance because he was 22, and car insurance at that age will eat you alive if nobody helps you. I didn't do any of this because I expected a reward. I want to be clear about that. I did it because it was the right thing to do, and because I had the means to do it, and because my wife had asked me to, and because at the time I believed we were building something together. That's the part that matters. At the time, I believed. The trip had been planned since August. My wife's sister was getting married down in Charleston the week before Thanksgiving. Big family affair. Her sister had rented out a whole block of rooms at a hotel downtown, the kind with the gas lanterns out front and the wraparound porches. The plan was that the whole family would come down, spend 4 or 5 days together, attend the wedding, have Thanksgiving early before everyone scattered back to their regular lives. I had booked the flights in August, both of us, round trip, direct. I had put down the deposit on our room at the hotel, which was not cheap. The wedding rate was still $240 a night, and we were staying 4 nights. I had arranged to take time off work, which at my age and in my position takes some coordination. I had done all of this quietly, the way I do most things, because that's how I am. In September, Corey's father, the one who had sent birthday cards when he remembered, apparently decided he wanted back into the picture. I don't know exactly what happened between them. My wife didn't tell me much, and I didn't push. I knew there had been some phone calls. I knew Corey had driven up to see him one weekend in early October. When he came back, something had shifted, though I couldn't have told you exactly what. My wife started talking about the wedding differently. She started saying we in ways that didn't seem to include me. She said we're thinking about driving down instead of flying. She said we'll probably want to get there a day early without discussing it with me. Small things, the kind you notice but tell yourself you're imagining. I wasn't imagining. The morning of the text, I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. I finished my coffee. I washed the cup and set it on the drying rack. I stood at the sink and looked out at the backyard, at the oak tree that drops leaves all over the porch every year, and that I keep saying I'll do something about and never do. I thought about calling her. She was already at her sister's place in Charleston. She had driven down the day before to help with wedding preparations. Corey had gone with her. I had stayed back because I had a meeting at work. I couldn't move, and I was supposed to fly down that Friday. This was Wednesday. I thought about calling. I thought about it for maybe 30 seconds. Then I didn't. Instead, I went to my home office, and I sat down at my desk, and I opened my laptop, and I did what I should have done the moment I read that message, which was to think clearly. Here is what I knew. She had not asked me not to come. She had told me. There was no question in that text. No "what do you think?" or "I'm sorry to do this," or "can we talk first?" It was a statement of fact, delivered at 6:43 in the morning, while I was sitting in my own kitchen in a house I had owned for 11 years. Here is what else I knew. Corey's biological father had no job that I was aware of, no property, and no history of financial contribution to his son's life. I, on the other hand, had been paying for the boy's education, his lease, and his insurance for the better part of 2 years. Here is what I decided. If I was not welcome at the table, I had no obligation to keep setting it. I made 5 phone calls before 9 o'clock that morning. The first was to the airline. I canceled my Friday flight. The cancellation fee was $80, which I paid without blinking. The rest came back to me as credit. I wasn't going to use it for a while, but that was fine. The second call was to my bank. My wife and I had a joint checking account. This was where her salary was deposited, where we paid household bills, where I had been automatically transferring a portion of my income every month for the last 3 years. I did not close the account because I'm not a man who does things in a panic. But I did remove the automatic transfer. That monthly contribution, which, if you're wondering, was roughly the same as a car payment on a luxury vehicle, would no longer be moving anywhere automatically. She would find that out on her own, in its own time. The third call was to the school in Georgia. I had been paying Corey's tuition through a payment plan, each semester broken into 3 installments. The fall installment had already been paid. The spring installment was due in January. I called the Brassard's office and informed them that the third-party payment authorization on that account was being rescinded. The woman on the phone was professional and efficient and asked me no questions I didn't want to answer. She told me the student would receive notification that the authorization had been removed and that the account holder would be responsible for the balance. I thanked her and hung up. The fourth call was to my insurance agent. Corey was on my policy as a secondary driver. I had him removed. This was not done in anger. It was done because a man I had never met had decided he was the relevant father figure now, and relevant father figures carry their children on their insurance policies. That's how it works. The fifth call was to my attorney. I had worked with him for years on business matters, real estate closings, a small dispute with a contractor back in 2019, things like that. I called him that morning not because I had made any final decisions, but because I am 63 years old and I have learned that it is better to have a conversation with your attorney before you need one than after. We talked for 40 minutes. He was matter-of-fact, the way good attorneys are. He told me what my options were. He told me what certain things would and wouldn't cost. He told me that in his professional opinion, based on everything I described, I was in a better position than I probably felt like I was. That was the most useful thing anyone said to me all day. My wife called me that afternoon at around 2. I let it ring. She called again at 2:15. I let that one ring too. She left a voicemail the second time. I listened to it once, standing in my kitchen eating a sandwich I'd made for lunch. She said she knew I was probably upset. She said she hoped I understood that this wasn't personal, that Corey just needed to feel like his family was together right now, that it was a sensitive time, that she was sure I could appreciate that. She said we would talk when she got home and sort everything out. I finished my sandwich. I put the plate in the dishwasher. I went back to my desk and kept working. I did not call her back. Here's something I've thought about a lot since all of this happened. There are 2 ways a person can respond when they've been dismissed. The first way is loudly. The phone calls, the accusations, the showing up anyway, the demanding of explanations. I have watched men do this. I have watched it accomplish nothing except to confirm in the other person's mind that they were right to dismiss you. The second way is quietly. Quietly doesn't mean passively. Quietly doesn't mean without consequence. It just means you don't give the other person the satisfaction of watching you fall apart. I have always been a quiet man, not cold. I want to be clear about that. My children, my friends, anyone who has known me for more than 6 months will tell you I am not a cold man. But I do not perform my emotions for an audience. When I'm hurt, I don't announce it. When I'm angry, I don't broadcast it. I sit with it. I think, and then I act, carefully, in ways that are measured and deliberate, and if I'm being honest, in ways that tend to last. My wife had known me for 4 years before she married me. She should have understood this about me. Maybe she did and thought it wouldn't apply to her. That's a mistake people make sometimes with quiet men. She came home on Sunday afternoon. I was in the backyard raking leaves when I heard her car pull into the driveway. I kept raking. She came around the side of the house and stood at the edge of the yard, still in her travel clothes, a long cardigan, boots, her hair pulled back the way she wore it when she'd been driving. She looked tired. She said my name. I kept raking for another moment. Then I stopped, and I looked at her. She said she wanted to explain. She said that Corey's father had told Corey that he wanted to be there for the holidays, that he was trying to make things right, and that having me there would make it complicated. She said she'd had to make a choice in the moment, and she hadn't handled it well. She said she was sorry. I listened to all of it. Then I said, I understand. She looked relieved. She started to say something else, and I said gently that I was almost done with the leaves, and I'd come inside in a few minutes, and we could talk more. She went inside. I finished the leaves. I put the rake back in the garage. I took my time about it. When I came into the house, I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd read her text 4 days earlier, and I told her what I'd done. Not everything at once. I told it the way you'd peel something. I told her about the flight first. She nodded, said that was understandable. I told her about the automatic transfer. She got quiet. I told her about Corey's tuition authorization. She said what? Which was the first time I'd ever heard her voice crack like that. I told her about the insurance. She asked me why I would do that, and I told her that I wasn't in a position to continue financially supporting a household arrangement that I was no longer a full member of. I said it just like that. She stared at me. Then I told her I'd spoken to my attorney. She said, "Are you saying you want a divorce?" I said, "I'm saying I had a conversation with my attorney. That's all I'm saying tonight." The next few weeks were not pleasant. I don't want to make this sound smoother than it was. There were arguments. There were nights when the house felt like a room that 2 people were occupying without speaking. Her sister called me, the one whose wedding I had not attended, and she was kind, actually. She said she'd thought the whole thing was wrong from the start, and she wanted me to know that. I appreciated that more than I expected to. Corey called me once. I was surprised by that. He was quiet on the phone, careful with his words in the way young people are when they're trying to say something they haven't practiced. He said he hadn't known she was going to send that text. He said he didn't know about the tuition situation until his mother told him, and that he understood why I'd done it, even if it put him in a hard spot. He said his father had been full of big promises since September and that some of them were already starting to fall through. He said that last part quietly, like he wasn't sure he should be saying it at all. I told him I bore him no ill will. I told him that whatever happened between his mother and me had nothing to do with how I felt about him as a person, and that I hoped he finished his degree and did something good with it. He said, "Thank you." I said, "You're welcome." That was the last time we spoke. My attorney had advised me early on that if I was seriously considering ending the marriage, I should document the financial contributions I'd made, tuition payments, household transfers, the hotel deposit I'd never gotten back, not to go after anyone, just to have it in hand if it became relevant. I spent an afternoon doing exactly that, pulling bank statements, printing confirmation emails, putting everything in a folder. It was a strange afternoon, not angry exactly. More like the feeling of balancing an account you've been ignoring, a kind of grim clarity. My wife had brought her own financial history into the marriage. She worked. She had a salary. She was not a woman who'd been dependent on me in any total sense, but there was a meaningful gap between what I contributed to the household and what she contributed, and that gap had gotten wider over the years without either of us making it explicit. The arrangement had worked when we both believed we were working toward the same thing. When it became clear that we weren't, the arithmetic looked different. Her attorney, she'd gotten one by November, tried to make an argument about the tuition being a marital expense. My attorney handled that conversation without much drama. The payments had been made voluntarily from my separate accounts. on behalf of someone who was not my biological child or my legal dependent. The authorization had been rescinded before any additional funds were dispersed. There was not much of a case there, and eventually that line of argument went away. The divorce was finalized in the spring. I won't tell you it was easy. I'll tell you it was right. I have been thinking since then about what I would say if someone asked me why I didn't just go to Charleston, why I didn't just let it go, why a grown man would take apart an entire financial arrangement over a text message about a holiday trip. And the honest answer is, it wasn't about the trip. The trip was the moment I understood what I was looking at. 4 days in Charleston would have come and gone. But what that text told me, what it said clearly in plain language at 6:43 on a Wednesday morning, was that I had been placed in a category. The category of people who write the checks and do not get a seat at the table. The category of useful but not essential. The category of, and I mean this precisely, the stepdad. Now, I have nothing against stepdads. I am technically one. I know men who have stepped into fatherhood for children, not their own, and done it with grace and love, and I have enormous respect for them. But what I will not be, what I refuse to become, is the kind of man who funds the table and then politely steps aside when asked to, because someone else decided his presence was inconvenient. I am 63 years old. I have worked for everything I have. I have shown up for people my entire life. Sometimes when I didn't have to, sometimes at cost to myself. I have never asked for much in return, except to be treated like I matter. That's not a high bar. I don't think that's a high bar. There is a detail I've left out, and I want to include it because I think it's the part that actually made me sad. A few months after everything was settled, I was cleaning out the garage and I found the bag I'd packed for Charleston. I had already packed it before the text came. I'd done it Tuesday night, methodical the way I am. Everything folded and in place. I'd put it in the garage ready to load into the car Friday morning, which of course never happened. The bag had been sitting there all winter. I stood in the garage for a moment looking at it. It wasn't grief exactly. It was more like recognition. Recognition that I had been ready to go, that I had wanted to be there. That some part of me had been looking forward to it. The wedding, the hotel porch in the evening, the particular kind of warmth that comes from watching someone you care about celebrate something. I had packed that bag with every intention of showing up. I unzipped it and took out the clothes and I washed them. I folded them and put them back in the dresser. I put the bag on the high shelf. Then I went inside and made dinner, and I ate it alone and the house was quiet. And the quiet was fine. I moved into a smaller place in March. A condo, newer construction, with a balcony that gets good morning light. I got myself a single coffee cup, just one, on purpose, and I use it every morning. I sit on the balcony when the weather allows and I drink my coffee and I think about whatever I want to think about without explaining myself to anyone. It's a particular kind of freedom that I don't think you can fully appreciate until you've spent years without it. My contractor finally finished the back porch on the old house. That was in the settlement. That'd see the repair through before the property transferred. I drove over one afternoon when I knew she wasn't home, and I walked around the back and looked at the work. It was good work. Solid boards, properly sealed, exactly what I'd been trying to get done for 2 years. I stood on it for a minute and put my weight on it, and it held without a creak. I don't know who lives there now. I hope the porch holds up for them. People ask me sometimes if I regret how I handled it. Usually people who know part of the story, but not all of it. They say things like, "Wasn't that extreme?" Or, "She's not a bad person, you know." Or, "Corey didn't deserve to have his tuition pulled." And I hear all of that. I do. But here's what I tell them. She is not a bad person. I never said she was. She made a decision, one decision, on one morning that told me everything I needed to know about where I actually stood, and I made my decisions accordingly. That's not extreme. That's just honest accounting. As for Corey, I hope he's okay. I genuinely do. I hope his father showed up the way he said he would. I hope the semester worked itself out. I hope he graduated and got the job he wanted and that somebody decent is in his corner. I mean all of that. But I am not a scholarship program. I am a man. And there's a difference. The last thing I want to say is this. I don't tell this story to make myself look good. I'm aware that I do not come out of it looking uncomplicated. I pulled financial support from a young man who needed it. I didn't fight for my marriage. I sat in a house for 4 days in silence instead of getting on a plane and having a conversation like an adult might, some people would say. Maybe they're right about some of that, but I was 63 years old and I was tired. Not lazy tired, not give up tired. I mean the specific tiredness that sets in after you have spent decades doing right by people. And finally, you start to understand that doing right by people is not the same thing as doing right by yourself. Those are two different ledgers, and I had been keeping one of them very carefully and the other one not at all. That Wednesday morning, with my coffee cooling on the table and her words on the screen in front of me, I decided to start keeping both. It cost what it cost. I would do it again. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. And if any part of this sat with you, if something in here reminded you of something you've been carrying, I'd be glad to know. That's what we're here for. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened. Not obsess over it, just sit with it, the way you sit with something that's already done and can't be undone and probably shouldn't be. What I keep coming back to is this. Cause and effect doesn't care about your intentions. It doesn't care that she probably didn't think it would land the way it did. It doesn't care that she thought I'd absorb it, adjust, and keep the direct deposits moving. The text went out at 6:43 in the morning and the consequences started moving at 6:44. That's just how it works. Every choice casts a shadow forward, and the shadow doesn't ask permission before it arrives. I'm not a man who believes in getting even. That's not what any of this was. Getting even is small. It's scorekeeping. It's ego. It's needing the other person to feel what you felt so you can feel better about feeling it. I don't have the energy for that at 63, and honestly, I never did. What I did was simpler and harder than revenge. I just stopped pretending the arrangement was something it wasn't. That's the part that took the most out of me. Not the phone calls, not the attorney meeting, not the uncomfortable weeks in that house before I moved out. The hardest part was admitting to myself that I had been pretending for a while, telling myself the discomfort I felt was normal, that every blended family has friction, that I was being too sensitive about the small things. I had been substituting effort for honesty. I kept doing more, thinking that doing more would fill whatever gap I sensed opening up. It doesn't work that way. Effort without honesty is just motion. You cover a lot of ground, but you don't get anywhere. The intelligent thing, and I mean intelligent in the plainest sense, not clever, not strategic, just clear-eyed. The intelligent thing is to look at what's actually in front of you instead of what you wish were there. I had the information I needed long before that Wednesday morning. I had it in September, probably earlier. I chose to interpret it charitably. That's not a character flaw, but at some point charity becomes avoidance, and avoidance has its own cost. Here's what I know about resilience. For whatever it's worth, from a man who's been around long enough to have earned a few opinions, it is not the same thing as endurance. Endurance is staying in a difficult situation and absorbing it. Resilience is staying in a difficult situation until you understand it clearly enough to make a real decision and then making it, even when the decision costs something. Corey's tuition cost something. Leaving that house cost something. Sitting alone in a smaller place in March with one coffee cup cost something. I paid all of it. And I am on the other side of it now, on a balcony in the morning light. And I can tell you that what I paid for was worth the price. The last thing I'll say is about decency, because I think it gets confused with weakness sometimes, especially in stories like this one. My wife was not a villain. Corey was not a bad kid. Even the man who reappeared after a decade of birthday cards forgotten. I don't know his full story either. Decency means I hold on to that. It means I don't need any of them to be monsters to justify what I did. I don't need a villain. I just needed to be honest about what I was looking at. and honest about what I deserved. And I did deserve better, not as a punishment to anyone else, just as a fact about myself that I'd been too polite to say out loud for too long. That's enough. Sometimes that's the whole lesson.